Our next speaker is Nick Ward from PNNL.
Great. Thanks, everyone. I'm happy to be here. Sorry I wasn't here yesterday. I'm traveling on my way here. Today, I'm going to talk about some work that myself and many others have been doing in the Amazon basin for quite a while. The data I'm going to talk about today is from three main projects. ROCA, which was led by Tish Yeager out of University of Georgia. TROCUS, the next iteration of that work, led by Jeff Ritchie out of University of Washington. And then more recently, a Mudbanks project led by Brad Rosenheim and Valier Gali. They were nice enough to let me talk about some of their really exciting data coming up here. And so the whole, these legacy of projects really are about understanding transformations of carbon across the land-ocean continuum of the Amazon. So we focused on myself, mainly the lower reaches of the river that are tidally influenced and had not really been studied to date, going out into the ocean and basically meeting the river with the ocean across these different projects. I'm going to give you the punchline right up the beginning. So kind of summarizing what I'm going to talk about today with some data examples. So bottom line up front here, I'm going to step out so I can read it. The Amazon basin and its inner plumes are highly efficient reactors. These are highly reactive sort of zones that carbon gets transported through. About 95% of the organic matter fixed by terrestrial plants on land. That's right, I don't think I need internet. Is either degraded in soils before reaching the river or degraded within the river, with only about 5% of the terrestrial organic carbon actually leaving out to the ocean. Once it gets into the ocean, as I'll talk about, it gets continually degraded as well. So then moving on to what the implications on carbon dioxide emissions, there's high levels of CO2 exported from the river. So the river itself is exuding quite a lot of carbon dioxide to the atmosphere, but it also exports high CO2 to the ocean that continues to degas in the inner plume. And that's continuously fueled by organic matter degradation. As I'll show, if you consider the inner plume, we start thinking about the plume actually as a net carbon source to the atmosphere rather than the traditional view as the plume as a net carbon sink related to nutrient export. And then finally, some of Brad and Valier's cool work showing that about 50% of the particulate organic matter exported from the river is lost really only within that first 100 kilometers of the river, which is still fresh and not saline. Compared to this massive size of the basin, so the whole Amazon River covers about 3,000 kilometers, and the depositional area of the plume is about 1,500 kilometers of coastline, but a lot of action happening in that first 100 kilometers. Here's some pictures of our field teams going back to my grad school days in ROCA to my postdoc during TROCUS, and I wasn't on this cruise because as I'm now a father of two and didn't have 6 weeks to spare to go out in the field. So first starting in the river and looking at dissolved organic matter. What I've thrown up here is Van Crevelen plots showing how the composition of DOM changes during incubations conducted both within the tidal river, the inner plume, and the outer plume. If you haven't looked at these plots a lot, essentially they're showing us where molecules map in terms of their carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen ratios. And if the very middle, so let me see if this is working. The very middle here is generally what we consider to be things like lignin and other molecules related to terrestrial organic matter. When we throw water in a bottle and keep it in the dark, we see a consistent loss of a lot of that terrestrial material. So the blue colors here are molecules that were lost in the incubations. The red molecules are things that were gained, like maybe lipids and proteins, as bacteria consume terrestrial organic matter and fixed biomass. I wanted to point out sort of consistently across these different areas that terrestrial organic matter is lost, whether your salinity is 0 or 30. There's microbes eating that stuff up. And as a result, we have different compounds found in the river only, the ocean only, or a limited amount of compounds found in both end members as a result of continued degradation along the continuum. I want to also point out that degradation isn't a necessarily linear process or related only to the chemical composition of the organic matter. We've looked at things like priming effects that happen when you mix different sources of waters together. So in this case, we were mixing algae-rich water with sediment-rich Amazon water. And we found, so the black line is just Amazon water. If you look at the green and the blue, that's when we either mixed different waters together or mixed algae in with the Amazon water. And we can see that degradation goes up by about 4 to 5 times when you mix in labile substrates with this terrestrial organic matter. So the presence of algae actually stimulates the breakdown of terrestrial organic carbon. And we think that is at play when the river starts exporting material out into the plume where you have algae blooms from the nutrient content. Building on that concept, we're looking here just at a conservative mixing of DOC across a range of salinities. And we see that here in these sort of mesohaline areas, the DOC concentrations are well below conservative mixing lines by about 30% actually. And so we're attributing that both to biological priming, like I just described, as well as photo degradation, which Misha Seidel's done quite a lot of cool photo degradation experiments I'm not showing here. Conceptually, as we travel through the plume, we sort of we go across a gradient of dominant processes where in the inner plume, it's a lot of this biological bacterial breakdown of organic matter. As we start to lose the turbidity, photooxidation becomes a more important process throughout the plume. What does this mean in terms of CO2 emissions? First, I'm just going to point out that in the past, we haven't considered this whole large surface area of the tidal river. If we consider CO2 emissions along just the tidal river itself, it emits about 50 teragrams of carbon. For context, previous estimates of uptake in the outer plume were about 30 teragrams. So this tidal river in itself is offsetting completely any uptake in the outer plume. We also did some remote sensing studies looking at CO2 uptake and emissions across the entire Amazon plume. So we're just mapping out what we consider the plume and excluding the open ocean over here. And compared to previous estimates, we've used data a lot closer to the mouth of the river itself, owing to the transects we were able to do on our cruises. And now if we start including nearshore waters, like I alluded to, we're exporting a lot of CO2 from the river. We actually flip the net balance of the Amazon River plume to being a source of about 9 teragrams of carbon dioxide rather than an uptake of about 27. And this is just factoring in that we're including the nearshore waters here. So you need to get close to the river to understand the carbon flux. I'm going to do my best to explain this really cool data that Valier's and Brad's group put out. So they're doing a variety of techniques here. They're doing radiocarbon dating, and they're also doing a technique called ramp pyrolysis oxidation, what Valier calls the dirt burner. So they're basically burning dirt at different temperatures to get this activation energy. And so they can look at labile versus a refractory material, and then also capture the CO2 that burns off and measure the radiocarbon age. So what we're seeing here essentially is a new way of mapping and doing an end member mixing model. We have this young reactive, so fraction monitored is basically modern material that has a really low activation energy, so it's easy to consume. It burns up quick, and bacteria can burn it up quick as well. And then you have this really old refractory stuff that sticks around. And then marine carbon that's, again, very modern. And without understanding the full mixing model that he did here, I'll say their conclusion was that about half of the POM exported from the Amazon River is degraded in these mud bank systems. And the majority of the carbon is river derived. So about 80–90% of that is this old refractory material that sticks around. And with that, I'll end 30 seconds early. Thank you.